Here's what no one tells you about being the good girl. The approval you get isn't for who you are. It's for who you're willing to raise yourself to become. I want to talk about something that almost never gets questioned. Not because it isn't painful, but because it's praised. And that's being the good girl, the good daughter, the good student, the good employee, the good, understanding, patient woman. For a long time, I believed that being good would keep me safe. What I didn't realize was how much it was costing me. I was rewarded for being easygoing, for not needing too much, for not complaining, for adjusting myself to fit whatever the room required. And in many ways, that strategy worked. It kept the peace. It avoided conflict. It made me feel like I was doing the right thing. But it also kept me small. It kept me quiet. It kept me from wanting more, for asking for more, from believing that I deserved more. And the cost of that didn't show up all at once. It showed up slowly, in the way that I couldn't speak up for myself or advocate for myself at work, in the way that I undercharged for my efforts and my work, in the way I felt guilty every time I chose myself, in the way that I stayed in situations that drained me because leaving felt selfish. This video is about the hidden cost of being the good girl and how that identity, the one that once kept you safe, might be the very thing keeping you stuck. The good girl isn't born. She's trained. She learns early that approval equals safety, conflict equals danger, obedience equals love. She learns to read the room, to anticipate needs, to adjust herself before anyone asks. And when she does it well, she's rewarded with praise, with relief, with temporary peace. Her nervous system learns being good keeps me safe. I learned this early. If I didn't ask for too much, no one would be upset. If I made myself small, I could avoid being a problem. And that worked. For years, it worked. How sad. I became the daughter who didn't cause trouble, the student who followed the rules, the employee who never complained, the friend who was always understanding. And people loved that about me. They praised me for being mature, for being selfless, for being easy to deal with. But what they didn't see, and what I didn't see, was how much I was suppressing myself just to be that person. Because being good didn't just mean being kind. It meant not having boundaries. It meant not having desires that might inconvenience anyone else. And over time, I learned to disconnect from those parts of myself entirely. I stopped asking myself what I wanted. I stopped checking in with how I felt. I just focused on what everyone else needed and adjusted myself accordingly. And my nervous system rewarded that. Because every time I stayed small, I avoided conflict. Every time I stayed quiet, I avoided criticism. Every time I prioritized someone else's comforts over mine, I maintained connection. So my body learned, this is how you stay safe. This is how you stay loved. But here's what no one tells you about being the good girl. The approval you get isn't for who you are. It's for who you're willing to raise yourself to become. For many women, being good wasn't optional. It was how love was maintained. Punishment was avoided. Chaos was reduced. Emotional explosions were survived. Being good meant don't upset anyone. Don't need too much. Don't want too much. Don't take up space. That became a survival strategy, not a personality trait. I grew up in an environment where my goodness was expected, where being a good daughter, a good sister, a good cousin meant putting my family's needs before my own. And when I didn't do that, when I chose myself even slightly, I was punished for it. Not physically, but emotionally. I was told I was selfish. I was ungrateful. I was a bad daughter. And those words didn't just hurt in the moment. They shaped how I saw myself for years. Because if choosing yourself makes you selfish, then the only way to be good is to not choose yourself. And that's exactly what I learned to do. When I wanted to travel, I was told I was irresponsible. When I wanted to focus on work, I was asked if my job was more important than my family. When I wanted to save money for myself, I was expected to contribute to the household expenses in a way that would completely wipe out my savings instead. And every time I tried to advocate for my own needs, I was met with guilt, with tears, with accusation, with the message that my desires were a betrayal. So I stopped having them. Or at least I stopped expressing them. And I told myself that was what love looked like. That sacrifice was noble. That putting others first was the right thing to do. But it wasn't love. It was control. And it was teaching me that my worth was conditional on my willingness to disappear. And here's the thing about that type of conditioning. It doesn't just affect your relationships. It affects everything. It affects how you show up at work. It affects how you price your services. It affects how you advocate for yourself. It affects how you relate to money. Because if you've been trained to believe that wanting more makes you selfish, then asking for more feels impossible. Here's where the costs become visible. The good girl undercharges, she over-delivers, avoids asking, feels guilty receiving, feels selfish wanting more. Money threatens the good girl identity because money creates autonomy, independence, power, choice. And choice can disrupt approval. So the nervous system pulls back, not because money is bad, but because money threatens belonging. I see this pattern in my own life so clearly now. Every time my income increased, something in me pulled back. I remember working back-to-back 12-hour shifts for a week. My income increased drastically and I was proud of myself. I felt capable. But then I froze. I couldn't bring myself to take on any more work for the rest of that month. Not because I didn't need the money, but because something in my body said, this is too much. This is dangerous. And at the time, I thought that was laziness. But it wasn't. It was my nervous system protecting me from a version of me that felt too powerful, too independent, too removed from the identity I'd been taught was safe. Because being the good girl meant being needed. And if you're financially independent, you're harder to control. I also see it in how I related to my savings. Every time I started to save money, I felt anxious, not excited, anxious. Because I knew that at any moment, I would be asked to pay an unexpected bill that was beyond my capacity. And if I said no, I'd be selfish. I'd be a bad daughter. I'd be choosing money over family. So I never felt like my money was mine. I never felt like I had permission to keep it. I never felt like I can use it for my own desires without guilt. And that's what being the good girl does to your relationship with money. It makes you feel like you don't deserve to have it. Like you don't deserve to keep it. Like wanting it makes you greedy. And so you undercharge. You overdeliver. You avoid negotiating. You say yes when you want to say no. You constantly give more than you have. Not because you're generous, but because charging what you're worth, keeping boundaries, and prioritizing your own financial security feels like a betrayal of the identity that kept you safe. I can see now how deeply that pattern ran in my life. I felt guilty for choosing myself, for traveling, for wanting freedom, for prioritizing my own life. I was taught explicitly and implicitly that being a good daughter meant sacrifice, that my needs were secondary, that my desires were selfish, that my autonomy was a threat. My body learned being good keeps me safe, and being free doesn't. And that belief shapes everything. When I booked my trip to Vietnam, I was so excited because it was my first solo trip. I'd been talking about traveling for years. I'd worked 14-hour shifts all of December just to save for it. And when I finally booked the flight, I felt this rush of joy, this sense of, I did it. I'm actually doing this. But then I told a family member, and they were upset. They told me I was being irresponsible. And I understood they were saying it from a place of concern. But it doesn't change the fact that immediately after that conversation, my joy collapsed. I felt anxious. I felt guilty. I felt like maybe I had made a mistake. And then I had to tell an important family member. And best believe I put it off as long as I could, because I knew that she'd be upset. When I finally told her, it went exactly as expected. She told me I was selfish. I was made to feel like a bad daughter for leaving a sick elderly woman alone. Mind you, she wasn't actually alone. And for the entire month leading up to that trip, let's just say things were tense. She didn't speak to me the day I left. And she didn't speak to me the entire month that I was gone. So what should have been one of the happiest moments of my life was filled with shame, with fear, with the constant message that choosing myself made me a bad person. And that's what being the good girl does. It makes you feel like your freedom comes at the cost of love, like your autonomy is betrayal, like your desires are selfish. And so you learn to stay small, not because you want to, but because the cost of expansion feels so high. The good girl can be disciplined. She can be consistent. She can perform for a while. But eventually, her nervous system collapses. Because goodness requires constant self-monitoring, emotional suppression, chronic self-abandonment. And the body can't sustain that forever. That's when motivation disappears, consistency breaks, resentment builds, shutdown begins. Not because she's failing, but because she's exhausted. I've experienced this collapse more times than I can count. I'd start suffering with so much energy, so much drive, so much determination. And then without warning, I'd shut down. I couldn't bring myself to continue. I couldn't find the motivation. I couldn't just push through. And I'd blame myself for that. I'd call myself lazy. I'd tell myself that I lacked discipline. I'd wonder why I couldn't just be consistent like everyone else. But what I didn't see was that I wasn't lazy. I was depleted. Because being the good girl requires constant emotional labor. It requires you to monitor everyone else's feelings, to anticipate their needs, to adjust yourself before conflict even arises. And that is exhausting. It's exhausting to never fully relax, to never fully trust that you're allowed to take up space, to never fully believe that your needs matter as much as everyone else's. And when you live like that for years, your body eventually says enough. It shuts down your motivation. It makes you too tired to perform. It forces you to stop, not because you're weak, but because it's trying to protect you from burning out completely. And this is why the good girl pattern is so insidious. Because from the outside, it looks like you're doing everything right. You're kind, you're helpful, you're selfless. But on the inside, you're disappearing. The hidden cost of being the good girl is not just exhaustion. It's unrealized potential. It's delayed independence. It's suppressed ambition. It's financial limitation. It's a life lived smaller than it could have been. And the most painful part? She often blames herself for the pattern that once kept her safe. I think about how many opportunities I didn't take because I was afraid of being selfish. How many times I didn't start something new because I was afraid of what people would say. And I think about how much smaller my life became because of that. Not because I wasn't capable. Not because I didn't want more. But because wanting more felt like betrayal. And that's the cost no one talks about. The cost of living a life where your desires are always secondary. Where your ambition is always suppressed. Where your potential is always limited by someone else's comfort. You don't just lose money, you lose years. You lose possibilities. You lose versions of yourself you never got to become. And the most painful part is that you often blame yourself for that. You tell yourself you should have been braver. You should have been stronger. You should have wanted it more. But it wasn't about wanting it more. It was about being conditioned to believe that wanting it at all made you bad. The moment I stopped shaming myself for being too good, something shifted. I could see I wasn't weak. I wasn't passive. I wasn't incapable. I was conditioned. And thankfully, conditioning can be gently unwound. Not by becoming aggressive, not by forcing confidence, but by teaching the nervous system that autonomy is safe, that desire is allowed, that choosing yourself doesn't equal abandonment. This shift didn't happen overnight. It happened slowly. Through small moments of choosing myself, even when it felt uncomfortable. It happened when I booked that trip to Vietnam and went anyway, despite the guilt. It happened when I started keeping a small portion of my income for myself, even when I was expected to give it all away. It happened when I said no to opportunities that felt too heavy, even when people told me I should say yes. And each time I did that, my nervous system learned something new. It learned that choosing myself doesn't result in abandonment. It learned that having boundaries didn't result in rejection. It learned that wanting more didn't make me a bad person. And the more I practiced that, the more I could see that I wasn't selfish for wanting freedom. I wasn't selfish for wanting financial security. And I wasn't selfish for wanting a life that felt like mine. I was just a person who was taught that her worth was conditional on her willingness to disappear. And now I was learning that wasn't true. And that changes everything. Because when you stop seeing your desires as selfish, you can start building a life around them. When you stop seeing your boundaries as cruel, you can start enforcing them. When you stop seeing your ambition as a threat, you can start pursuing it. Not by becoming someone new, but by unlearning the belief that being yourself is dangerous. If this video stirs something deep inside you, whether that's guilt, sadness, anger, relief, don't rush past it. I created a gentle nervous system reset for women building income. It's there to help your body settle as you begin to loosen these patterns. You'll find it linked below. Remember, this isn't about fixing yourself. You're not broken. This is about unwinding conditioning that was never yours to carry and doing it in a way that feels safe. Remember, you don't have to stop being kind to stop being small. You don't have to harden to become powerful. And most importantly, you don't have to abandon yourself to be loved. The good girl kept you safe. Now you get to build a life that lets you stay. A life where your desires matter, where your needs are honored, where your ambition is celebrated, where your income is yours to keep. Not because you become someone else, but because you remembered who you were before you learned to shrink. That's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you don't know who I am, my name is Mary. And I hope you let go of all your stress and stay blessed.